Hi, everyone. Ariana Friedlander here with Rosabella Consulting, and welcome to the Co-Creators in Conversation interview series, where we celebrate inspiring leaders who are challenging the status quo and creating economic value by genuinely caring about their people. Right now, I'm so excited to be talking with Allison Seabeck, Executive Director of the Warehouse Business Accelerator Program in Loveland, Colorado. Welcome, Allison. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. This is a fun conversation.
I am so looking forward to it. We've been talking already in advance, and I can't wait to share some of the insights and wisdom you have for our listeners. To get started, though, I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about your background, what your role is there at the warehouse, what you do and what the warehouse does.
Yeah, happy to. The Warehouse Business Accelerator, I'll start there, as a nonprofit focused in economic development, supporting businesses, specifically manufacturing companies, technology companies, through this really tricky phase of business called scale up. So there's a lot of resources out there, information about how do you start a business. But your troubles don't end when you make your first sale. And what we do at the warehouse is support founders of companies when they have to move into the next phase of how they lead and how their business operates and how they build in repeatable processes and scalability into their organization. So at the warehouse, we match founders with mentors. We also offer a physical space where companies who make stuff can build their business, and that's at the Warehouse Innovation Hub. How did I come to find this place, to find this organization, and why did its mission resonate with me? I think is the part of the story I like to tell the most.
Ooh, do tell.
Yeah, so I had previously been a part of an organization that was going through its scale up phase. So we were transitioning when I joined the company away from the founder of the business making all the decisions and putting in teams and processes and trying to get more people in the organization engaged in kind of making those day-to-day decisions so that the company could scale. And after a few years and a number of different roles in that business, I ultimately took over leading that company for about 5 years. And the thing I loved the most was trying to figure out how do we change the organization from the inside to really operate differently. How do we engage people and build a culture and build an environment where people feel valued and want to come to work, and then also do great things and make an impact with the content, the service that we were delivering, which I'm happy to talk more about too. When I left that company, which was called Prosci, I was looking for an opportunity to just give back to help other businesses. And I came across this nonprofit, the Warehouse, that had been around for about 7-8 years at that time. And I thought, gosh, what they're trying to do here is build our community, support the growth, the future economic success of our community where we live by taking great ideas that start here and helping them build into successful scaled up businesses that grow here. And I thought that resonates, and I'd like to do that. Wasn't looking for a job, wasn't looking for a full-time position, but the executive director position became available. And I was really, really honored to be asked to step into that role. And that was 2 years ago. And so kind of here we are now on the backside of COVID, having pivoted a few times as an organization and helped others do the same.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. What a wonderful peek into your background and the work that you're doing there at the warehouse, and especially understanding that personal experience you have working in a business that went through that scale up process. What are some of the challenges that you experienced leading Prosci as it was scaling up? You kind of alluded to the need to make changes from the inside. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that was like?
Yeah, each business starts with a great foundation, but sometimes you have to break things or change things to be able to get from kind of where you have been performing to where you have the potential to perform. And so we spent a lot of energy with people, helping to build kind of a sense of ownership in the business through decision-making coaching, and through teaching people about emotional intelligence and about how to have crucial and critical conversations. We had to learn what strategic planning looked like as the organization grew, and we had to figure out how our business model had to evolve. So one of the biggest changes was we moved from being exclusively research and training as an organization into also providing consulting services and providing video-based learning instead of just in-person training programs, and providing online tools and a software, basically a software application to engage with those tools. And so each of those projects was a major change in and of itself. The good news is that the actual content, what we provided to clients, was research and best practices in how to change. That is what Prosci specializes in.
Right.
We had the opportunity to apply some of those best practices and those processes and those tools, not always well, never perfectly,
right.
But, get to apply those inside the organization. And, people need to think differently, show up at their job differently, participate in teams differently, collaborate and share information differently. When you're talking about, a team of 10 versus a team of 50 versus a team of 100, and you go up from there. And so a lot of those changes were about, building out, how are we going to work? How are we going to provide the same great quality service and product, exceptional experiences in a training context? How are we going to do that at a larger scale and across different product lines?
Yeah. And I mean, so many different things to wrap your head around. The logistical component of scaling up, the commitment to quality, and what you're providing to customers, the opportunity to practice your own solution as a company. And then you also mentioned earlier that shift from, I think this was more about the warehouse. So wondering if there's a parallel there with, when a company is scaling, there's this shift from the founder knowing and doing everything to other people being involved. And I know that's one of the things that I've seen some clients really struggle with, where, the founder, it's like their baby, and I get it. My business is my baby too. And so you kind of get so vested in, nurturing and caring for your baby and knowing all of these parts of it. But then as you need other people to take sense of ownership and to make decisions, you have to let go. And that can create some sources of tension or difficulty, because the founder might stay in that role as the CEO and need to change how they show up, or step out of that role, but also still need to change how they're showing up. So I wonder if there's anything that you experienced around that, that you could share with us.
Yeah, the way you need to lead, not your core, who you are as a human and how you, show up in the world just at your core values level, but what the activities you need to be doing, what the responses when people bring you questions or problems need to be, what your day-to-day activities really entail. Those things all evolve and change. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons that we really want to help entrepreneurs go through the process of kind of figuring out at the warehouse, and then just kind of in general as I'm talking to people in the world. What got you success in that startup phase is not necessarily what's going to get you success in the next level. And so your job as a leader is to always be curious and asking, what do I need to do differently? How do I stay true to my values and my core? And at the same time, learn new skill sets, bring in new ways of thinking, new ways of doing your work, so that you can show up as the type of leader that your organization needs from today forward, and not the type of leader that your organization needed from the start to get here.
How would you characterize those differences? Like, in terms of the way a leader needs to show up? Like, can you give some specific examples?
Yeah. So, when you have built the business and it's your baby and you know how every piece connects to every other piece, all the details of not just the high level P&L financial report, but exactly where every dollar went in the checking account. Right. You really have a good sense of the picture of the organization overall. But as your organization scales, if you're spending your time worrying about all of the details of, where every cent in the checking account is coming and going, and you don't have someone that's helping you do that, you end up missing the opportunities to be thinking about how the business runs as a whole. And I could say the same thing for the customer service process and how every single customer, if there's a problem, how that's being addressed. You need to know about those things as a leader, as the business scales, but you aren't doing them every day. You turn away from being the primary doer of the important activities of the actual implementation and operations of the business to the person who understands still how all those pieces connect, but you're not doing the detailed level actions. And in fact, this is one story that I will share with you really specifically.
Okay.
Yeah. So as we came towards kind of 4 or 5 years into the tenure of my role as president at Prosci, I like to roll back to the warehouse and check out how things were going, and which is a good practice. And then I pulled up to a table where they were literally cutting tags off of, this product that had gotten shipped in that we were going to reship back out with our training materials. And I pulled the scissors and started cutting tags. And we started talking about, the flow of how things were going in the warehouse. And I was having a great time. And the manager of the warehouse said, "Allison, get out of here. You're making things worse by being here and sticking your nose into this work." And I think there's a fine balance there, right? I do really believe that it's important for every leader to continue to stay connected to all the pieces of the organization. But I was no longer in a position where if they're in a crunch time, it made the most sense for me to run in and start cutting tags off of something in the warehouse. And the questions I was asking were things that they had already thought about, right? This is how it shifts. If you're coming in as a leader and coaching someone to think a little bit more broadly, connect to other parts of the organization, that's highly valuable. Right. If you're coming in and asking them questions that they've already got covered because you hired people who know how to do their job better than you know how to do their job, then you're wasting their time, right? So
such a funny and subtle nuance.
To
pick up on, right?
It is a very fine line, and that feedback from the manager of the warehouse was so important. Right? I thought I was doing a great thing. And by some metrics and measures, you would say that is a great thing. But he was expressing how that was actually impacting him and his team. His team didn't feel like they could go leave the table and do other work that needed to be done because they thought, well, the president's here. I need to continue to sit here and, engage in this conversation.
Right. Yeah. Just like how we all drive the speed limit when there's a cop behind us. Kind of similar in that way. But I wonder, because as you were talking, you mentioned that when you're in that smaller startup phase, you're doing everything, all of these details. And I think there's also, I've seen with some clients I've worked with, and I'm thinking of one in particular that's in manufacturing, that as they've scaled, the founder really needed to shift also from really being the knower of all things too, and being the one, it's such a tricky transition to make, in being the one people come to with questions and asserting knowing on these manufacturing procedures and things like that. and letting go and letting people make some mistakes to learn, but then also that mindset shift of trusting your team that they do know and that you don't have to have that intimate, deep level knowledge that's required.
Really difficult transition, especially if you have built your career, your success, and your identity on being a knower, on knowing answers, and on having information that people need to be more effective in their work. And, I think I just alluded to this a little bit earlier, a few minutes ago. It's not just you get to a point where you don't know the information. You have to get to a conscious point before that where you do know the information and you say, go figure it out.
Right.
Or here are the other folks that you need to engage with to come to a decision. The support I'm going to provide you is getting your confidence built to the point, getting your capability and knowledge set built to the point where you can take that and own it. Even if you, as the owner, the CEO, the founder, whatever your title is, even if it's the manager of a team, right? Even if you know that answer, giving it to them can be the easiest, immediate, short-term answer, but it in fact inhibits your scaling capabilities as a team.
It really does. And I think that what I saw with the one client I'm thinking of in particular was how triggering it was for this leader to see these mistakes, to know the right way, and then blurt things out because it was this trigger of, I think part of how we're raised and cultured in our education system to get the answer right. And then you want to be that kid in class. We've been trained and conditioned to be that kid in class that gives the right answer. And so there was just such a need to repattern as a leader and recognize like, oh, this is a trigger. This is how a trigger feels. I'm going to make this, shift consciously so that I rewrite that pattern to stop giving the answer and start creating space for my team to find the answer themselves.
Yeah. And I do want to point out, especially in manufacturing, sometimes the answer is critical importance. If you have certifications for the level of quality assurance of your manufacturing line and your processes, sometimes the implications can be pretty large. And so it's really beneficial to intentionally try to start out with some of those maybe smaller things that do have some impact, but not business critical impact.
Right. Yeah. You're not going to miss a shipment.
Right. Yeah, so you get those opportunities. You need to go look for those opportunities on things that might cost you, $50 or $100 of a mistake instead of $50,000 or $100,000 mistake.
Yeah. That's such a valuable insight to be sharing. And I understand that you were at Prosci for, it sounds like 10 years. And then you made a very conscious choice to transition. Can you tell us a little bit about what led to you making that decision to transition out of a very prestigious role in a very prestigious organization?
And in an organization that was continuing to grow and continuing to provide great service and opportunity for, professional trajectory. I want to make sure that's clear. Prosci is a fantastic organization. I'm still an enormous advocate for what they do and who they are. And the information that they bring to the world really, truly helps businesses and helps people navigate change. And I can't recommend them enough. And I also recognize in myself a lot of small things. I have a half-written post that I haven't made public. That's the 57 reasons why I left. And a lot of them are pretty small, but they're all part of the big picture. I think at the heart, though, there are a couple of factors that are relevant to this conversation. And one of them was recognizing that what I love to do is be able to jump between the high-level strategic and the details of operations. And there's a phase when the leader of an organization needs to be able to do that, to elevate people's vision, line of sight up to the long-term direction of the company and the big picture strategy, and also still be diving down and maybe even creating some of those spreadsheets, right? And that's what I enjoy and what I excel at. And as the company continued to scale and grow, I recognized and appreciated that something different was needed in that president CEO seat. Something that was far less in the operations and far more in the strategic. Not to say it's ever 100% and 0%, but that proportion that ratio was changing. And I wasn't having as much fun because what the company needed and what my passions and where I get enjoyment and where I think I add the most value was no longer, quite the same match. Also I was looking at some of the realities of working in a business that has a national and international scope. We didn't have a lot of clients here in Colorado, much less Northern Colorado, at the time that I was at Prosci. And I felt like I was living in a place that I loved, but not connected to it. And so I wanted to have the opportunity. And one of the things I really focused on in stepping away was looking for opportunities to be able to connect with the place where I live and to do work here in Colorado that makes a difference to our neighbors and our friends that are in our own community. It's not to say there's not a fantastic, great place for companies that have national and international scope. That's actually the types of companies that we want to bring into the Warehouse Business Accelerator.
Right.
But for me, being able to engage in the community where we live is really important and something I really appreciate about this opportunity at the warehouse.
Yeah. And it sounds like, and you said this to me before, that there was just this misalignment for you, which is such an important and sometimes difficult awareness to bring ourselves to that place, to recognize it and then do something about it. What was that like for you to make that leap?
Well, I'll tell you, it wasn't a clean, easy, fast, simple process. There was a lot of anguish, a lot of agony, a lot of missed opportunities with the team at Prosci. They were starting to ask some of those questions that I needed to be reflecting on. And I appreciate that looking back, but it was hard. Yeah. It was hard to recognize something in yourself and to understand what those implications would be for your family, for the team, for the things that you have worked so hard to build. One of the things that I greatly appreciate about the founder of Prosci and the person that I took over for as I started my tenure as president, when it was time for that transition to happen, Jeff Hyatt put his intentions and energy into figuring out how do we make the most effective, best transition possible. Take that entrepreneurial mindset, take that engineer's brain and say, okay, this is our challenge at hand. It's a new challenge. It's how do we create the longest lasting legacy for this company, give it the most opportunity to succeed. And I know that I have a misalignment here. And so I want to figure out what's the best way we can make this transition. I don't think I did everything right as I was stepping away. I think Jeff had opportunities. He could have done some things better too. Right. But that core intention of saying, my goal is the success of this organization and my alignment to my future passions and my project for the next period of time is to figure out how to make those two go as smoothly as we possibly can. And I think that's a conversation that every entrepreneur needs to start being aware of thinking about long before the time actually comes when it needs to happen.
Right. Yeah. Almost as this proactive effort and process to bring out instead of this reactive oh, we need to do this now. let's figure this out. It's so much harder when we are reactive in that way to something that is urgent than when we can be proactive. And people sense that shift in energy, I think, too.
Mm-hmm.
As well.
Your shift, there's two shifts in energy, right? There's a shift in energy of I'm trying to figure out what my place is, and I'm kind of wrestling through these things. That's sensible, like able to be sensed, right?
Yeah.
But there's also a shift as well that I noticed when I did ultimately make that decision that it was time to step away. From that moment forward, just, the internal decision between myself and my family, no one else knew, but I now knew for sure what my job was for the next 3 months.
Right.
And that actually was a second change in energy that I think was also probably perceptible as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder too, I think when we feel that need for a decision and a change to be made, it almost like it has this gnawing effect, or it just kind of wears, at least that's what I've found myself and working with other entrepreneurs and leaders, right? Just like kind of gnaws on us. It's maybe we're uncomfortable, not sleeping well, or just kind of struggling to experience some peace, feeling like this worry, this low grade anxiety. But then when we make that decision that needs to be made, that shift, that commitment to the change, there's a relief that comes, even though there's still some uncertainty and other things to figure out. There's that relief when we align with this truth.
Yes. And I would say the other way that kind of low grade anxiety, like you talked about, shows up is in how you react to and show up for others around you. People on your team, staff, employees, but also your family, people in your community. When that's gnawing at you, everybody can appreciate that, right? When you're a little hungry and they haven't had enough food yet, like someone comes to you with a request, like you don't necessarily respond the same way you do after you've just had a delicious snack, right? But the same thing happens when there's something that's misaligned under the surface. It really can impact the way that you're showing up for people around you. And so it's just really vitally important to work through that in the productive, positive ways, acknowledge what's happening to the extent that you're comfortable being vulnerable, share with people that you're working through something difficult, and really make it a part of your job as the leader to put some attention on what's happening under the surface.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's such a brilliant share, because I know for myself, anytime as I've done this work, right, to recognize my triggers and recognize how different things about what I'm thinking or worrying about impacts how I show up, there are times where I'll just get really angry about something. And I've started to pause in those moments and say, but what am I really bothered by? Because it's not the person that cut me off. It's not this other situation that I'm reacting to. It's something else deeper that is, really just rubbing me the wrong way. And I am taking it out on this other situation because I, just am, I guess, limited capacity. So it's such an important thing, I think, to bring our awareness to.
Mm-hmm. And not necessarily something that is historically, traditionally part of leadership training.
Right.
Your MBA. I suspect there's more of that now. There's more positive psychology. There's more emphasis on mindfulness and meditation. And you're hearing about that in a lot of different contexts. But that traditional definition of a command and control leader doesn't leave a lot of space for that. And I think that's really something we've missed out on as a society for all the years when we elevated that type of leadership as the epitome of what it means to be a good leader.
Right. And I think that's a lot of the tension I see happening in organizations with, and among leaders and employees and emerging leaders, is that command control style of leadership even if we've intellectually moved past it, we're still embodying it in so many ways. And I know you shared earlier that you're a misfit. You identify as a misfit, I should say, and that some of that sense of being a misfit also tracks a little bit with your style as a co-creating leader. And was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about that part of your journey, what that's looked like and how you've gotten there.
Yeah. I have found throughout my life, I mean, as far back as like grade school and high school sports and college clubs, I don't come into these organizations seeking a position of leadership. I come in to build, to find relationship, to participate in an activity that I believe in, that I enjoy, and have found myself ending up in positions of leadership for reasons that for a long time I couldn't quite really understand. Why does this keep happening to me? It's fine. I'm capable of it and have had lots of opportunities to prove that. But I guess the first place of kind of misfit was it wasn't my career aspirations to be a business leader. I, in fact, stayed as far away from the business school as I possibly could in college. I came into this world with the world of business, right? With a hope, an aspiration to be able to get to work on a cool kind of concept, idea, project with a great company, to be able to help other people around me be successful, and to ask questions that help me understand better what's going on. And those questions end up being an interesting framing of the problem, insightful, helping people think differently. And those are some of the skill sets that I, looking back, recognize are very valuable. Decision making is not my favorite thing to do, and leaders have to make decisions. I don't operate at a extremely fast, boom, 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 get it done speed. I'm much more deliberative, probably take too long to evaluate all the options and look at all the criteria. But in a lot of ways that ends up presenting as a different kind of leader. So valuing relationships, slow, kind of deliberate speed, really, evaluating lots of information and wanting to gain more information before making a decision. In some cases, kind of on the negative end of the spectrum, shying away from making those important decisions that need to be made. Those are all pieces of, what I recognize was a misaligned, misfit from what folks were expecting of a leader in some cases. I'll tell you a story about really a misfit that I tried to be what I wanted, what I thought other people wanted. As I took over leading this company, the founder exited, we sold to private equity, we had our first all hands meeting post transaction. And I thought that people expected and needed the new leader to show up with a clear plan, a clear articulation of what our values are, and really pretty definitive acknowledgement of what's going to change and where we're headed. So I like to say I showed up with our strategy on a platter and unveiled it at this all hands meeting. And at the end of the day, I was exhausted. I had some of our key leaders come and approach in the parking lot and say, "What was that? It's not that this is bad stuff that you're talking about, but I've never seen this before. You showed this to me at the same time you showed this to the rest of the company. This is not how this needs to work." So what I thought was my job, to set vision, to share what the values are, in fact, didn't work. I went home, walked straight in the door, laid down on the couch and fell asleep because I was so exhausted. And it actually had an impact on relationships with some of my senior leaders for years to come. When in fact, what was more needed was a little bit more co-creation, was work up front to gather people's kind of engagement in what we're doing and where we're headed, as opposed to a reveal on a platter. Right. Then kind of fast forward a little bit, and the pendulum swung too far the other direction as well. And so there were times when it was a difficult problem shows up in the business. It may be a personnel challenge, it may be a customer challenge, it may be a strategic decision, an opportunity. Do we pursue it or not? And I showed up to a leadership team meeting wanting to co-create, wanting to draw out from the group, what should our vision be here? What should we be approaching? How should we be approaching this problem? And there was a misalignment when we had people giving feedback saying, you're the leader. We need you to set some guardrails here. You can't show up with a blank slate and say, what you all figure out what we should do. That's abdicating your role. So you need to pull us through, guide us, get our input, and set the guardrails. And so I had this experience of the pendulum swinging both directions, right, trying to find out what other people wanted, not what was true to how I wanted to lead both times, right?
Yeah. And oh my gosh, those stories are so wonderful. I'm so grateful to you for sharing them, because I think we can all identify with having been in similar situations on both of those ends, right? That time we think, well, we have to have the answer because we're the leader, we're in this position, we're responsible, whatever the story is that we're telling ourselves. And so we show up giving everything to it, just having it all laid out there. And I mean, that does just really alienate people in so many ways. And then that opposite extreme of, well, what do you think? Like, it doesn't generate the results that we want. I love what you said about those guardrails. I think that that's such an important piece in co-creating is you need to have guardrails. I'm always a big fan of saying water without a container will go everywhere and anywhere, so we need to contain our efforts. And really, when we're co-creating as leaders, that's what we need to do. We need to provide the container, and we need to provide just enough direction of we're going that way. But we don't need to have every step of the way figured out and laid out there.
Right. And if you try to lay out every single step, you will be exhausted. You will be burnt out. Your organization will only get as large as the number of hours you have in a day. And that's not its full potential.
Totally not. I so agree. This has been so fun. I feel like we could talk forever, and I know we're over time, which just went by so fast. But I wonder if there's anything in closing you want to say about just what it means to you to co-create it. This is, the Co-Creators in Conversation interview series. What, in a sentence, does that mean for you?
Co-creating is what solves our problems in our world, addresses challenges, creates new opportunities. How we as a society move through the next 10 years, 20 years, 50 years on this planet doesn't happen by one person deciding what's going to be. It's all co-creation.
Yes, you're preaching to the choir. Yes. I so agree with you. And if somebody that listened to this interview would like to learn about the Warehouse Business Accelerator Program, or your space, or connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, we'd love to have you check out warehouseinnovation.com. That's the website for the Business Accelerator, as well as our Innovation Hub, where we have physical space on a month-to-month basis for manufacturing and technology companies to build their business. We would also ask you to follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Warehouse Business Accelerator, a search on either of those will get you connected with our social presence. And I am always interested to talk one-on-one to founders, to leadership teams. So you can reach me through the warehouseinnovation.com website for a conversation. And that's my favorite way to connect.
Awesome. And we will include all of those links in the show notes. So you can look there to connect with Allison. Thank you so much for this time together. It's been just so spectacular to hear your story. There's so many wonderful nuggets. And thank you to our listeners as well for joining us today. It's great to have you here. Please do subscribe to the channel if you want to continue to get updates about new co-creators and conversation interviews, and share this interview and things that you've learned with friends. Maybe take one nugget, one insight that you want to act on so that you're propelling your own leadership journey forward, because that's why we're here, is to inspire you in your journey to continue making progress. So thanks again for joining me and Allison for Co-Creators in Conversation, and take care.